Hello, my name is Patrick von Sychowski. I'm the editor of Celluloid Junkie and also the moderator of the weekly CJ Cinema Summit. I'm here today to talk a bit about post-pandemic technologies and how to keep moviegoers safe. A big thank you to Bob and Andrew for giving us this opportunity, and obviously to Phil and Laura for putting together the whole of the CineEurope Live. So let's get straight to it. When we talk about technology, we usually assume and think about the most kind of advanced and sophisticated and expensive, frankly, such as these. A robot in South Korea, which will monitor your temperature, clean the floor, provide hand sanitizer, and tell you to keep social distancing. Or this light strike, which will instantly zap your entire auditorium and kill all the viruses and germs in there with its ultraviolet blast of light. And we are seeing some examples of this being implemented in cinemas. And of course, where else but in Korea, where they've always pioneered advanced new cinema technology. CGV has introduced a robot that will help people find their way around the multiplexes. They've got hands-free concessions pickup and hands-free soda dispensing, and frankly, everything there is automatic. But the thing to remember is there's a price to all this, and the biggest price of all when you're trying to keep your cinema safe is that you have to do it in a way that works in a cinema environment. It can't simply be that it looks like a decontamination of Chernobyl or a nuclear accident. So how then do we do it, and how can technology help us? Well, the good news is that we all know what needs doing because we've had it drilled into us now for several weeks and months about the importance of keeping distance and about washing hands and so on. And really, the most important thing that I want to stress in discussing anything, whatever technology and measures you adopt, they have to comply, obviously, with local regulations, whether it's your national regulations or state regulations. It might seem an obvious point, but it is important to stress that the differences are significant from country to country, whether it's a 1 meter distance or 2 meters, 6 feet distancing, whether a mask needs to be worn indoor at all occasions or only in some areas where there's crowding. Now, if you're lucky, you might be living in a country like France, where they've specified and actually published a guide to how you can keep your cinema safe. So talk to your local cinema trade body if you haven't done so already, and also other similar establishments in the hospitality sector that are impacted by this. Now, in selecting a technology for keeping your moviegoers safe, the same applies as for any technology in cinemas, which is the old good, fast, cheap rule of thumb, which is you can have two of these three, but you can't have all three of them. So if you want something that's good and you need it fast, then it's going to cost you. It's not going to be cheap. And similarly, if you want something that's good but is cheap, it's going to take longer time, and you're stuck with low quality if fast and cheap is what you're going for. So bear that in mind. But there is good news here because it doesn't have to be expensive. Take this, for example. So there are technology solutions for measuring people's temperatures as they enter the cinema. And there are companies that will happily sell you these kind of systems, like the SmartPass system. But ask yourself, would it maybe be better to just put up a sign that tells audiences that if they're not feeling well, they really shouldn't be coming to the cinema? That is a cheaper way, and it relies on the cinema audience themselves to police that there isn't somebody spreading germs coming to the cinema. Frankly, the most cheap of all technologies that cinemas can offer is this one, a simple hand sanitizer. And really, it doesn't have to be much more complicated than that, although as we'll see, there are important technologies to aid this, but if nothing else, be sure to stock up plenty of hand sanitizer. The other good news is that some of these new technologies might not be as new as they seem. In fact, this solution for concessions and automatic vending enabled by QR codes in your smartphone looks remarkably like a technology which was with us 50 years ago. You might be old enough to remember the automatons. You fed them with a coin rather than a QR code, but the principle is pretty much the same. So in 50 years, we've done a full circle in terms of the kind of technologies and solutions that are coming back and are inspiring us in terms of coming up with ways of rethinking retail. It's also important to think laterally, because even though there are regulations about social distancing and seat rows, sometimes there are ways of accommodating audiences in ways that make more sense. So for example, if you need to have a distance between the seats, you might also be able to have people sit closer together if they are divided by a simple sheet of plexiglass. So remember that you can abide by rules in many different ways. The next point is that some of these technologies can actually make it cheaper for you. We are moving away from cash and moving towards credit card and electronic payments. And this has already happened in other countries. We wrote about it, in fact, 3 years ago, when Svenska Bio in Sweden ditched cash completely in favor of electronic payments, such as credit cards and apps. And there are benefits to this because there is a total lifetime cost of 3% of any cash transactions. So there are benefits to going electronic other than just contact tracing. The best inspiration I've had for how to go about really implementing technologies that keep moviegoers safe came from Bain & Company, and they outlined general things for hospitality businesses, which were looking at technology ways to mitigate health risks. And they focus really on 3 areas that I'm going to touch upon further in this talk, and that's the use of touchless technologies, such as automatic doors, the enablers for keeping social or physical distancing, and finally ways of monitoring health of not just your customers, but also your staff and employees. Now, the point that they make is that you don't necessarily want to rush into any of these. Remember the cheap, fast, and good rules. So if you want it affordable and you want it good, it's going to take a little bit longer. So if you're already not opening or haven't thought about opening, take your time to do the homework. I'm sure many of you have already, but really talk it through, look at all the alternatives, weigh up all the options, and then decide how is the best way of going about doing this for your particular cinema. Whether you're a multiplex or single screen independent cinema, it has to make sense for you. Now we're going to look at some examples. So I'm going to share with you some good ideas that I've been picking up from the internet and from various companies in the cinema space. Now, I'm not specifically endorsing these solutions. These just happen to be examples from companies that I was aware of what they were doing, and also some of them reached out to me to point me in the direction of what they were doing. So keep that in mind. There are lots more other solutions. These are just some of them. The first one is coming from a company called Harry, which is software tools for HR and staffing. And it is important to keep your staff healthy and not just your customers, because remember, the risk of transmission goes both ways. They've got a health check platform, which is an app, which is a self-monitoring tool whereby staff record their own health symptoms. It's cheaper probably to buy them all a thermometer than it is to buy an electronic thermometer monitoring everybody. And then they report this in to the HR for the company. And that means that there's an easy overview of how all the staff are doing, whether they're ready to come into work, or maybe whether they should take some time off and self-isolate. And you can even have a certification then that says that all of our staff are being checked by this system. The next company is Harkness Screen, famous for all their cinema screens. Well, early on in the coronavirus outbreak, they pivoted and were very selflessly started making personal protective equipment, PPE, not just for cinemas, because obviously cinemas were closed, but for other healthcare workers and staff. And it's a really, really great initiative. So they do everything from personal equipment like face shields to equipment and tools that can be used in your off or in your premises, such as you can see here, on a retail and food and beverage situation. Notice, by the way, that it's a Harkness beer as well. Now, these are obviously adaptive, and all the different cinemas are going to have very different needs, but they're designed in such a way that they can be used and adapted for many different environments. In addition, for protecting staff and customers from each other, there is also barriers that can be used between customers. So if 2 meters social distancing or whatever the requirement is in your territory isn't possible, then you can still use these kind of solutions to enable a better use of space that still keeps everybody safe. Next one is a very simple solution, which is just a sticker that you put up on the wall, which is a QR code. Again, we're coming back to the QR codes that lets customers alert the cinemas if an area needs attention, if it needs cleaning, or if there's something that they feel isn't quite right and they'd like to leave some feedback, better than filling out a paper feedback form or going out and asking for an email, or worse yet, seeing an angry tweet. We all want to avoid that. This solution from Cielo, they're offering for free, I know, for some things, so do talk to them. Most importantly, obviously, is the distancing issue. Distancing in the lobby, spacing out the program, but also, and above all, the distancing in the seating. Now, you could do it like they have done in Japan and just block every second seat, but there is a slight problem if you have families or friends or couples, or frankly, anybody than loners going to see films at your cinema. So what you have to do then is dynamic seating. And obviously this is where we come back to that thing about it might be 2-meter rule, it could be a 1-meter rule. So what you really need is you need a piece of software that can be programmed to meet these specific criteria that are valid for your cinema and your territory. This one happens to be from Vista, but again, we know that Jacro, we know that Compeso and others also have these kind of solutions. So just take this as an example. And it lets you set your parameters and really enable the best kind of optimal seating in your auditorium, whether it's 25 or 50% capacity or whatever distancing, whether it's by row or by seat. It's important to remember it's not just about seats, obviously. It is about the entire customer journey. It's avoiding overcrowding in the lobby. It's spacing out the times between the screenings so that staff have time to clean the auditorium. It's looking at ways of managing traffic flow as people enter and as they exit the auditorium, depending on whether there are different exits or entrances and so on. So keeping in mind the fact that it's a whole journey. It's not just the fixed issue of the seating, although of course that is a very important one to keep in mind. And final one of the most detailed overviews and ideas of really any of a number of ways that you can work to keep your patrons safe came from Cinema Next. So do get in touch with them, and I'm sure they will be happy to share the slide deck from you. It runs to, I think it was 60 or 70 pages, I can't show you all. But they raise a lot of points which I want to flash up in this slide, which is that please keep in mind whatever solutions and technologies you decide to implement, they should ideally be as unintrusive as possible. And it's important that customers appreciate that you're putting in place all these safety measures, but at the same time, remember that photo of the Chernobyl decontamination effort. They mustn't feel so put off by seeing the cleaning measures and the sanitation measures being put in place that they start fearing for their safety and doubting whether they did the right thing to come to the cinema, to forget about everything going on outside, lose themselves for 2 hours, and so on. So it's important to let customers know that, let them see that you're doing that in a safe and smart way. Of course, they shouldn't have to smell of bleach everywhere, and there shouldn't be a risk either to your staff as the customers enjoy themselves. So the message here, and this, by the way, is the slide from Cinema Next, is that whatever solution you go for, whatever technology you go for, the most important lesson is this probably. Talk to your vendors. These are people who you've been having relationships with. If there's something they cannot provide, they will tell you as much. They're pretty good at it. I've been speaking to a lot of them, and they have spent a long time looking into what it is that they can do. So whoever it is, your vendor or your preferred partner, they can be of great help as you try to navigate this field. And remember, fast, good, or cheap, you can choose two, you can't choose all three. Please try to be smart in how you do it. I wish you all the very best of luck, and I look forward to being back in your cinemas, feeling safe and happy with my popcorn for the next 2 hours. Thank you all very much. I really appreciate this opportunity talking to you. If anybody wants to reach me, you can find us on our usual website, celluloidjunkie.com, cjcinemasummit.com, and I'm tweeting and LinkedIn on @PatrickVonS. Thank you very much from me.